Hey everybody, welcome to World History. So we're going to pick up with chapter 14 today. We're going to do section 1 today. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So chapters 14 and 15 are very much just talking about the expansion and the age of discovery among the European powers. So we're going to talk about things like Columbus, the Mayans, the Incans, the Aztecs. And one of the biggest things we have to talk about to start off with is spices, because those are the biggest thing that we have to focus on. So let me move my bubble up here so that way you can see the full slides. So, motivations for exploration. Our chief source of spices was the Moluccas, or an island chain in present-day Indonesia, once called the Spice Islands. You'll actually be marking this on your map assignment today. Now, by the 1400s, the Italian and Arab merchants in Europe at the time controlled most trade between Asia and Europe. Now, several nations wanted to control these lands for the use of the spices, mainly because they couldn't be grown in Europe, and controlling where they're produced meant that they had a monopoly on the business and they could then take control of that for themselves. Now, this led to a curiosity to seek new lands that became a factor because they wanted to expand their companies. So, Portugal will then sail east under the direction of Prince Henry, who led the way in sponsoring a lot of these early trips of exploration. His navigators discovered and claimed the islands of Madeira and the Azores. These are two islands to the west and southwest of Portugal. And by 1415, Portugal had expanded into Muslim North Africa by seizing the port of Ceuta. So really, Portugal among our European powers is really our first major one. Yes, a lot of later on we'll talk about the Spanish, the French, and the English. But at the beginning, it was very much based with the Portuguese. So when it came to mapping the African coast, Prince Henry wanted to control Africa for many reasons. First, he wanted to convert Africans to Christianity. He wanted to find sources of riches that the Muslims controlled and hoped to find an easier way to reach Asia. This would be basically his lifelong goal. This would continue until 1460 when he died, but the conquest would still continue. In 1488, Bartholomew Diaz rounded the southern tip of Africa en route to Asia around what we know today as the Cape of Good Hope. In 1497, Vasco da Gama followed Diaz's footsteps, leading 4 ships around the Cape, and he had actually had visions of going farther, but after 10 months at sea, he reached the spice port of Calicut, which is on the western coast of India. Da Gama would then sell the spices to enormous profits for himself when he returned home. His voyages confirmed that Portugal was a world power at the time, whereas today where we think of countries like the United States and Russia being world powers, in the 1490s to about 1520s region of the eras, we considered the Portuguese to be a major world power. Now, at the same time, Portugal's success created motivation for other sailors, and one of them being Christopher Columbus of Italy, wanting to reach the East Indies, aka the islands of Southeast Asia. Now, Columbus knew the Earth was a sphere and had to sail west across the Atlantic, and he believed that it would only take a few weeks to bring him to Eastern Asia. Now, the popular theory at the time was that of a flat Earth. The Earth wasn't round. You would eventually hit the end of the world and fall right off. But that was going to change. Now, he originally went to Portugal to ask them for the funding. They say no, but then he's able to convince Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain to sponsor him. They wanted to use this as a way to strengthen Catholicism and bring wealth and prestige to Spain. Now, it's important to note prior to this, they'd expelled all the Muslims and Jews from Spain, and that was not good for their local economy. A lot of the Jewish people in Spain that had been expelled were among the wealthy elites of Spain at the time. So, on August 3rd, 1492, he set sail with the 3 small ships, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, and as the saying goes, in the year 1492, Columbus set sail on the ocean blue. Now, they left in August. No land was spotted until roughly mid-October of 1492. Now, Columbus was convinced that he'd reached the Indies, so he called the people Indians. In all reality, he was realistically in the Caribbean. Now, he returned home to a hero's welcome, and had come to find out he had discovered a previously unknown continent, mainly North America, and then he discovered South America on a further voyage. Now, Ferdinand and Isabella, once Columbus returned, wanted to claim the newfound lands for themselves, and this led to a power struggle with a bunch of the other countries. Now, Pope Alexander would create the line of demarcation within the Western Hemisphere. This gave Spain rights to the land west of the line, and Portugal rights to the east. So essentially, this ran down the center of the Atlantic, meaning Spain had control of the Western Hemisphere, so namely the Americas, whereas Portugal could go after the eastern part of the world, so think like Asia, India, the Moluccas, the Philippines, that general region. Now, other countries now wanted to prove themselves against Spain and Portugal as well. So here's a great map, and you'll actually be doing your map worksheet today. So all of these different routes symbolize different expeditions and different routes. So the Moluccas are over here. We mentioned Calicut, which is also here. Ceuta is up here. The Cape of Good Hope, the West Indies, and of course you can look at all these different hold on while I move my bubble. All these different lines that symbolize different routes that people took. So, naming the Western Hemisphere. So, Amerigo Vespucci of Italy wrote a journal of his voyage to Brazil. And in 1507, a cartographer from Germany would use his journal to create a map of the Western Hemisphere. He labeled America, and eventually the term Americas was given to the region. Now, the land that Columbus had discovered specifically became known as the West Indies. Again, this being places like Cuba and the Caribbean islands. So, in September of 1519, so we've jumped well over 20 years ahead, Ferdinand Magellan, a native of Portugal, set out with 5 ships sponsored by King Charles of Spain, with the goal of finding a direct route. Now, by November of that year, Magellan had reached the southern tip of South America. He found a passage that later became known as the Strait of Magellan, and he renamed Balboa's South Sea to the Pacific, meaning peaceful. He's really the first one to truly circumnavigate around South America to East Asia. So, after the mission was accomplished, most of the crew wanted to go home. The job was done. Magellan did not, however. He made the decision to move towards the Philippines. This took another 4 months. Now, by March of 1521, a fleet reaches the Philippines, where Magellan is killed. The survivors then would flee and return home to Spain in September of 1522. So it took them a whole another year and a half to get home. And they were hailed as the first people to circumnavigate or sail around the entire globe. Right, so that is it for notes for today. What you're going to do now is the Chapter 14 map. I will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.